What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the No Man's Land. I'm Angela Ramirez. Today is October 7th. We have a lot to talk about. As usual, there is a lot of breaking news to cover. For those of you guys who don't know who I am, I run the No Man's Land Evening Post. There, I post a lot of investigative journalism, but because we are on a 24-hour news cycle, and there's a lot that's been going on throughout the country, a lot of unrest, a lot of political confusion, it's necessary for me, in order to cover all of the day-to-day ongoing events, to do this channel here. If you guys are listening to the podcast, thank you. I also have a YouTube channel called the No Man's Land Evening Post. You guys can see all of my written and investigative work at thenomanzone.com. I only publish investigative work on that website. Basically, it's me digging into what is going on throughout the country and who is fueling certain movements, what their agendas are. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in Marxism, but I do cover pretty much exclusively Marxist influence on my website, where I publish all of my investigative work. Anyway, welcome to the No Man's Land show. Today is Wednesday, which means I will be on the Conservative Chicanos web channel. They have a YouTube channel. It is myself, Pablo, and the Conservative Bear. We all do a YouTube show to discuss what's going on in the country from a conservative Chicanos background. So, without further ado, we have a lot to talk about today. I know I've already said that, but boy, is there some interesting stuff going on in the country. The first thing that we're going to discuss is voter fraud, mail-in voter fraud. And for those of you guys who aren't aware, I'm in Colorado, and we have a Secretary of State here who is Democrat. The state is pretty much a Democrat state, I would say. I live in probably one of the few cities that is a big city that's also pretty much red. We're a conservative city, and that's largely caused by the fact that we have a number of military bases here, and so the individuals who move in and out of our town are typically more conservative than Democrat. So we're kind of an outlier city here. However, the state itself, the governor is Democrat, the capital city's mayor is Democrat, and we actually have a number of openly socialist politicians who are occupying city council seats and public school board seats. So this kind of is a subject that hits very close to home. Our Secretary of State has made a few blunders regarding the safety of mail-in voting. She has come out and said basically that there's no cause for concern in regards to mail-in voting, that Colorado is a gold standard, and recently went so far as to advise journalists not to cover election night. I'm not kidding. This is actually covered in a separate video. Our Secretary of State here in Colorado, Jenna Griswold, went on Twitter and asked journalists not to cover what was going on election night. She said that they need to wait until all of the mail-in ballots are received by the state before reporting on basically what candidate is leading in each state. Now, obviously, that's a huge infringement on the free press, and Jenna Griswold, she pretty much came out the next day and said, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. However, when you have a Secretary of State who is A, refusing to acknowledge that there are some serious concerns regarding universal mail-in voting, and B, is publicly taking to Twitter suggesting that journalists do not cover the election night, that's really concerning. Whether or not she apologized for her statement, it is very concerning as a journalist and somebody who is a disaffected Democrat. For those of you who don't know my background, I was a lifelong Democrat. I was raised in California, and when I was about 21 years old, I moved to Colorado, and slowly but surely started to have my perspective changed. I saw the difference in how policy affected California and Colorado, this one small area of Colorado which is red, and I don't like to use the word red-pilled because I think it's a little bit overused, but that said, I started to realize that the Democrat methodology, the ideas that were held by, I guess, kind of classic liberals, are no longer the campaign and platform for today's Democrat Party, and I really just became disenfranchised with the Democrat Party, and now I'm a libertarian. I'm independent. In 2016, I voted independent. I kind of wasted my vote, to be honest, but I didn't vote for Trump. And this year, I will be voting for Trump That said, as somebody who intends to cast my vote for a Republican candidate in a Democrat state, it is very concerning the fact that lots of Democrat leaders throughout the country are denying that there's a real serious opportunity for mail-in voter fraud. And instead of addressing these issues, for example, requiring a ID in order to vote, whether you're voting by mail or voting in person, instead of taking foolproof measures to prevent ballot harvesting, to prevent voter fraud, and to prevent, intercepting mailed in ballots, we see Democrat candidates and Democrat politicians throughout the country saying, no, there's nothing to worry about. And that's very concerning as somebody who does intend to cast my first vote for the Republican Party. Now, that said, I'm going to actually start this episode today with some new information about cases throughout the country in which there have been issues with ballots and ballot applications reaching the individuals they are intended to be mailed to. So without further ado, we're going to go to Twitter, which is where I usually start out my stuff. Obviously, for those of you guys who don't know, Twitter is kind of where the news happens. When something is breaking, the individuals who are breaking that news typically post on Twitter first, before it gets to the news outlets, before you see it here on YouTube. Things happen on Twitter, and a lot of the public discussion on politics, on social issues, is happening on Twitter, which is why a lot of the things that happen on Twitter, it takes about a week or two for it to actually get to those of us who are not on Twitter as often. I'm personally on Twitter a lot, and I like to follow the people there. But that said, it's important for us to start, I guess, where the news is broken. And a lot of people post videos of things that they found. A lot of the breaking news starts out on Twitter, and then it goes to the news. So that's where we're starting. Okay, so basically we're going to start with SB News. They are kind of like a breaking news station. Whenever something happens, they publish it to their page. So their handle is @SB News Alerts. They are a fast and accurate news provider, getting breaking world news and U.S. news first in real time, which is what I really like about them. They put up riot footage, they put up, election stuff, and it's nice because they don't really give you the story. They just they're like, hey, this is what happened. Here you go. Hey, this is what happened over here. Here's a video about basically what just happened in this state or city, whatever. So, SB News today posted a video that was sent to them from Seymour, Indiana, in which two trailers, it was discovered that applications for voters from the Trump campaign were found destroyed. So there's actually two trailers in Seymour, Indiana, in which they believe thousands of ballot applications, mail-in ballot applications, were supposed to be mailed to voters, and they did not make it there. Instead, they were found destroyed in these trailers. So I'm going to play the video for you guys. Listen up. If you guys are watching, you can hear it. There's somebody narrating as they walk through the trailers, so you'll get the gist of it if you're just listening. And if you're watching, you should be able to see the video as well as hear it. So here we go.
Wow, what a mess. I'd be mad if they left my trailer looking like that. All shredded paper. This looks like a bunch of recyclables, right? Right? No, it's a Pennsylvania application for mail-in ballot. And they do have people's addresses on the back of them that were never mailed out. I mean, how many are in here? Thousands? There's another trailer out here. All the way back there, same product right there. We're out here in Seymour, Indiana at R.R. Donnelly. Some massive paper printing plant. Wow, what a mess.
Okay, so there's the video for you guys. Pause it. For those of you guys who are not watching and you're just listening, I'm going to explain what happens. There's an individual who, it sounds like he's a truck driver. He is walking up to two trailers, and he walks into the trailer, and on the ground of the trailer is just a bunch of shredded paper. And he says, wow, it looks like recyclables, right? And then he picks it up, and it's actually on one side of the paper, it is a piece of mail from the Trump campaign. On the opposite side of the paper, it actually says there, Pennsylvania mail-in ballot. So these are like destroyed mail-in ballots from the Trump campaign to voters, and he actually says there's an address right there on it. So they were addressed and supposed to be sent out to individuals, and somebody, we don't know who, somebody just kind of destroyed them, and they were left in this trailer. Now, we obviously don't know the chain of events that happened leading to these shredded ballots being placed in the trailer, and it's not clear whether or not this is an application for a mail-in ballot or if it's actually a mail-in ballot itself. Either way, this is an election-related piece of mail, and it did not reach the hands of the individual it was intended to go to. Not only that, it was actually destroyed and left in this random trailer here in Indiana. Now, this is pretty concerning because we have all been listening to stories pop up here and there. There was even a story here in Colorado in which people are not getting the right mail-in ballots. They're getting mail-in ballots that are addressed to the wrong individual. Here in Colorado, there's a story in which ballot registration postcards, which is basically like a reminder to register to vote, were sent out to individuals who were deceased and were non-residents of the state of Colorado. That story was first aired at CBS 4 in Denver, and it was retracted. It was deleted because there was a slight discrepancy. I think they said it was a registration card when in fact it was an application to, it was like a reminder to register. So the story was pulled. Regardless, somebody else down in Colorado Springs, one of the news agencies here in Colorado Springs, ran the story correctly, and it is still up, and I've done a video on that. If you guys go back and look at my other videos, I cover that instance. So here again, we see another example of election-related mail not reaching the hands of the individuals it was intended. In fact, it is actually destroyed. This leads us to the next story here, in which, that's not him. Let's see here, in which a USPS worker, so the United States Postal Service worker, has been arrested for discarding mail, including 99 general election ballots sent from the County Board of Elections that were intended to be delivered to West Orange residents. Now, this is a story from CBS 4 New York. I'm going to go ahead and read the story here for you guys. The headline is USPS worker in New Jersey arrested for allegedly dumping mail, including election ballots. This is why mail-in voting is such an issue. We don't know who is carrying the mail. We don't know if they're a political junkie and they aren't in approval of whoever is voting for one party or another. There's just a lot of room for error and room for malicious intent when you are mailing in and mailing out election-related material, which is why going to the polls physically is the most secure option, period. Physically showing up and putting in your vote at the polls it leaves the least amount of room for error. And I've covered this in other videos. But let's go ahead and read this article here from CBS 4 New York. Quote, a U.S. Postal Service mail carrier from Hudson County, New Jersey, was arrested for discarding mail, including 99 general election ballots sent from the County Board of Elections that were intended to be delivered to West Orange residents, U.S. Attorney Craig Carpinto announced. Nicholas Bushin, 26, of Kearney, is charged by complaint with one count of delay, secretion, or detention of mail, and 1 count of obstruction of mail. The delay of mail charge is punishable by a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison and a $2,500,000 fine, $250,000 fine. The obstruction of mail charge is punishable by a maximum penalty of 6 months in prison and a $5,000 fine. It says here, further down, if we continue reading, it says, quote, according to court documents, roughly 1,875 pieces of mail, including 627 pieces of first class, 873 pieces of standard class, 2 pieces of certified mail, and 99 general election ballots destined for residents in West Orange, and 276 campaign flyers from local candidates for West Orange Town Council and Board of Education were recovered from dumpsters in North Arlington and West Orange on October 2nd and October 5th. Okay, so and here it says intended destination for the ballots and campaign flyers are heavily Democratic areas, end quote. So this is exactly what I mean when I say that mail-in voting, mail-in election, just in general, election mail in general, it's not 100% secure, okay? And that's why I take such an issue with candidates and public service representatives pushing this narrative that it's totally secure. We see time and time again that when you trust something to be mailed out, something that is in such a volatile category as election mail, it leaves a lot of room for issues to pop up. Now, I have a little online store where I ship out my material, right? And so I use the mail. I use USPS specifically pretty much every day. Every single day I'm shipping out orders. And for somebody like myself who regularly uses USPS, I do agree that most of the time my mail gets to where it's supposed to go. That said, I've had things that get lost in the mail. I've had things that show up a few months later. Like, people ask for a refund, they never received it. I check the tracking information, it's lost in translation. Nobody knows where it is. And then, like, a few months later, it shows up at my client's doorstep. And, there is a lot of, for the most part, USPS is pretty good, and I trust the USPS. That said, we do have sometimes, in some cases, bad actors who are in a position where they're delivering mail, and for whatever reason, they don't want to continue out the day. They can just throw away the mail. Like, who knows why they do these things? I'm not some sort of psychologist. I'm not a political psychologist. I just know for sure that we have seen many cases in which ballots, election material, marketing campaign material in regards to public and local elections, they don't make it to their intended ending destination, right? And at the end of the day, when you mail something, you're sending it from yourself, you're giving it to a third party, it's in transit between multiple carriers, and by carriers, it could be the same country, but multiple drivers. It might be, it's on a truck in one area, and then it goes to a different section of the country, and it gets put on a second truck. There's a lot of room for error in that process, especially when we're talking about something as important as the election. Now, in my business, if things get lost, I understand that things get lost day to day in a business setting. And that is very different from things getting lost when it comes to the election process of one of the largest countries, one of the most influential countries in the world, the United States of America. So, that said, I wanted to touch on that because I do like to cover instances in which the mail-in voting, mail-in ballot issue is kind of lacking, to really raise awareness, both among the public and among our officials, that this isn't a foolproof system. Mail-in voting is not a foolproof system. And perhaps there are other alternatives to mail-in voting that would be preferable, more secure, and more reliable than the old-fashioned method of putting a stamp on something and sending it in the mail. So, that said, we're going to move on to another story here, and we're just going to touch on it very quickly because I think that it's interesting. It's important to follow up on this case. For those of you guys who have been following the George Floyd case, which was really the start of the widespread rioting and civil unrest throughout the country, the officer who was basically most accountable, according to body cam footage, for the death of George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, he was the individual who had put his knee on the neck of George Floyd for 8 minutes. Unacceptable, regardless of whatever position that you're in. Totally unacceptable to have a knee on somebody's neck. I train martial arts, I train jiu-jitsu, and I know that that is plenty of time, not only to make somebody suffocate and fall into a very serious health battle, but you can definitely kill somebody putting all of your weight on them for 8 minutes. Definitely, without a doubt. You can knock somebody out in about a minute. And that's like if they're actively resisting, right? 8 minutes is unconscionable. So, regardless, the former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin has been released from jail after posting a $1 million bond. Okay, I have seen a lot of people on the left be very upset about this. And interestingly enough, these are the same individuals who are pushing to abolish police and abolish the prison system. These are the people who are utilizing the phrase free them all. Okay, if you're going to start pushing this phrase free them all, you might want to think about this. Do we really want to free all prisoners? Do we really want to let everybody out of jail? Is it really in the public's best interests to push a narrative that once you think it through, it actually doesn't make any sense, okay? Like, if we want to free everybody, Derek Chauvin is included in that. Derek Chauvin, according to pretty much public consensus, and he is innocent until proven guilty in the court of law, but most people who have seen that video agree that Derek Chauvin probably did something wrong and will most likely be charged for some count or another in regards to the death of George Floyd. That said, this is why we need to really think reasonably and logically about what kinds of police reform and judicial system reform we really want in this country. Because here in Colorado, there is a huge movement led primarily by the Party of Socialism and Liberation called Free Them All, and it is basically freeing all prisoners and all ICE, immigration center individuals, freeing them all. Basically, everybody gets freed from jail. Okay, so if that's the case, then Derek Chauvin also is included in that. I've also seen people in California pushing for the idea of a cashless bail system, of not requiring cash in order to be freed from jail, in which case I urge people again to think about whether or not that is there for a reason. You can't say free them all, no cash for bail, just let people out. When people do something wrong, there needs to be some way to keep them separate from the public. Now, we can have a discussion all day about who should be imprisoned and for what crimes people should be imprisoned for. That's a totally different discussion. But at the end of the day, this radical left idea, which is largely, I don't understand why it's Marxist, but it is pushed by Marxist individuals, people who are openly socialist, people who are openly communist. I don't know that the idea of no prisons is a Marxist philosophy, because if you look at the first real communist movement and takeover during the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, roughly 1918, we see, people getting definitely released from prison. I don't know that you actually see people getting released from prison, but you kind of see a change of prison systems in which the Tsarist regime, I wouldn't even call them a regime, but the Tsarist government, right, was overthrown by Stalin, Lenin, and what happened was, instead of a judicial system being put in place, the judicial system was kind of just like a fake cover for what was really going on. People were still being put in prison, and I think Alexander Solzhenitsyn said at any one time there was roughly 18. I might be wrong on this number here, but if you were to read the Gulag, Alexander Solzhenitsyn says that at any one time there is roughly 18 million people in the gulags at any one time. The gulags was a basically system of work camps and death camps in which people would basically be worked to death. And interestingly enough, the communist gulags that were in existence in Soviet Russia, the early Soviet, I don't know if it was Soviet Russia, but in communist Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution and after the revolution, they were pretty much inspiration for what Hitler created, the camps that Hitler created in Nazi Germany. So it's very interesting to look at the parallels there. And so this is why when people say free them all and no jails, no prisons, and I'm very skeptical when that comes from a Marxist perspective, because if we look at history and we look at Marxist history, it doesn't coincide. It's not accurate. If we look at the way Marxism has played out in reality, if we look at real communist countries, they might, change the legal system, change who qualifies for being put into prison. But at the end of the day, prisons are still very much in use, which is, again, brings me to Derek Chauvin. The guy posted $1 million bond and he was released. So, for those listeners who are of the mentality that we should be eliminating jails, eliminating prisons, and eliminating police officers, it's worth wondering, do we just need to redefine what constitutes being placed into prison? For example, if you have a repeat nonviolent drug offender who is like regularly, getting caught with meth or getting caught with heroin, or they're just clearly kind of a junkie who is not able to get themselves off the drugs, and as a result they're committing crimes like theft, they're committing crimes like selling drugs in order to pay for their habit. Maybe instead of sending them to prison, we create some sort of system in which, instead of them being sent into a prison, which is not really rehabilitative, we develop a way for them to be separated from society, both for the public's best interest and their best interests, because if they're out on the streets just shooting up all the time, they're probably not living their best life. And we can create some sort of mandatory rehabilitation for people to get off drugs and get their life back together. Now, I know many people who are very serious drug addicts, and they are almost thankful sometimes when they get locked up. Like, I've gotten I won't say who, but I have people who I'm very close with who are repeat drug offenders, and there's been more than one occasion in which they said, it's good that I ended up in jail, it's good I got caught up, because if I hadn't, the way I had been going, I was on a bender and I probably would have overdosed and died. This has happened I know multiple people in multiple situations who have told me that. And it makes me wonder if it would be better, instead of us sending people to prison, we sent them to a rehabilitation center where they're not caged up, where they're not locked away for 23 hours a day, and they have the opportunity to figure out what it is internally that is having them turn to drugs, and to go through a rehabilitation process in which they get clean, they withdraw in a safe manner, and then they rebuild the character that it takes to be out on the streets and hold a regular life, and to be able to, say no, right? To say no to going back to drugs. Now, is that possible? Again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a drug expert, but I do think that it would be more beneficial to redefine how we decide to imprison people than just saying we're going to free everybody. Because again, if we look at Derek Chauvin, there's going to be a lot of people who think that he should be still locked up. And this is contrary to the movement that is going on the streets right now that says free them all, no prisons, no jails, no police. Okay, so again, Chauvin is out. We'll see how this goes. He is due back. I don't know when his court appearance is. It looks like this says here his court appearance is in March of 2021. So he'll be out on the streets until 2021. So that's that. Let's move on now to, this is my favorite. Okay, so if you guys don't remember, just 2 days ago, New York Governor Cuomo kind of threatened the Orthodox Jewish community that he was going to start closing their places of worship if they refused to comply to his rules. So Cuomo is upset basically because the Jewish community, Orthodox Jewish community, I'm not exactly sure what triggered it, but it sounds like they were refusing to use masks, or that they wanted to continue to gather for worship. And Cuomo was in a press conference in which he said that if they refuse to comply with the rules, he's going to have to shut down the synagogues. He's going to have to shut down the places of worship. That was 2 days ago. Last night, Orthodox Jews held kind of a worship ceremony on the streets of New York. They blocked the streets. They were singing. The police came, tried to round them up and get them off the streets, and they failed. The police failed. The Jewish community stayed on the streets. And later on in the night, I just want you guys to see this. Later on in the night, the Jewish community actually started a little fire in the streets where they were burning masks. And it was pretty cool, man. I was like, we've seen so many clips of Antifa burning stuff in the streets and being destructive and protest through destruction. Basically, what they're doing, it's terror, is what Antifa is doing. Anytime you kind of destroy things that are not yours, or intimidate people for the purpose of a political gain, that's terror. But what we see here from the Jewish community is basically they're blocking the road, they're singing their hymns, and then they start a little fire in the street where they start burning masks. So I want you guys to see this. So what they're doing is there's a big circle, everybody's in their Orthodox Jewish outfit, and there's a fire in the street, and people are taking off their masks. You see some masks being thrown into the fire, and it was good to see, because as somebody who is religious, I do attend church pretty regularly. I'm a Christian. I am aware of what has happened to places of worship during this shutdown. Basically, we have seen a double standard in which people are welcome to go protest in the streets in huge groups. However, going to church in many states has been pretty much banned. Like, they're not allowing people to attend church. They're closing down the churches. And so it was kind of nice to see some people of faith stand up and peacefully protest, and real peaceful protest. There's nothing that is violent here. There's nothing destructive about their movement right here. All we see is that they're burning their masks in the street, and they are blocking the road, but we apparently in this country have no issue with people blocking roads or interstates anymore. So good for the Orthodox Jewish community of New York. It's pretty fantastic, I have to say. Okay, so next big story is the Department of National Intelligence has declassified a number of documents that are relating to the Russian hoax. Now, this is going to be a story for another day. I think that I'm going to have to do a full separate segment about what is going on in this whole Russian hoax case. But at the end of the day, it looks like more information is starting to be declassified about Hillary's and Obama's role in creating a fake narrative that Trump was somehow being influenced by Russia or was a product of Russian influence. So basically, according to the Epoch Times, which, oh man, you guys, if you're not subscribed to the Epoch Times, they are the place to get news. Like, this is probably the only place I trust anymore for these huge, complex stories. The Epoch Times is where to go for information about what's going on in China, for information about really complex U.S. political stories. I recommend the Epoch Times, and they are running like $1. It's a special on their subscription. It's like $1 for 4 months of stories and news. It is well worth it. You will never miss that dollar. I promise you. They are a great news outlet. So here we have the Epoch Times. They have written a story in which it says, quote, "The head of U.S. intelligence community on October 6 declassified a referral sent from the CIA to FBI Director James Comey in 2016, which Comey last week claimed to have no memory of receiving. The 3-page referral, released by the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, to members of Congress in partly redacted form, appraised Comey and FBI Deputy Assistant Director Peter Strzok that intelligence suggested that Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton had approved a plan concerning the Trump campaign and Russia. Excuse me, I had to sneeze. And Russia, alleged hack of the Democrat National Committee." Okay, so what does that mean? That was end quote. Okay, so what does that mean? Basically, what we're starting to see come out now from declassified documents and in the courts is that Hillary Clinton was involved in a cover-up campaign and scandal to make it look like Trump had some sort of Russian connection, and that his campaign basically alleged in conjunction with Russia, had allegedly hacked the Democrat National Committee. So basically, what this means is Hillary Clinton fabricated a story that Trump had kind of given Russia the keys to hacking the Democratic National Committee. This is a really complex story, and I'm going to have to do a full 2-hour video probably explaining all of this because it's super complex, and it's going to require me making a whole visual representation of what happened so that everybody can get it, because like I said, it's really complex. There's a lot of people, and it's important for everybody to understand who was involved, where they were involved, and what kind of lies were being spewed around. But for the sake of conversation, for the sake of this short segment here, what you need to know is that it's starting to look like Hillary Clinton fabricated the lie that Trump was working with Russia. And not only did she fabricate the lie, but also the FBI was involved in supporting the allegations, the false allegations. The FBI knew the allegations were false and pursued it anyway. And not only that, but that President Obama, was also briefed on this false story and never said anything. In other words, Obama, Hillary, and the FBI director allowed a fake investigation and fake impeachment, because this is kind of what the impeachment was about. They allowed this to happen. They set Trump up knowingly. And boy, if all of this stuff really does play out, right? If all of these declassified records are reviewed and everything's taken to court, this is a bigger scandal than Watergate ever was. Much bigger scandal than Watergate ever was. So keep an eye out. I'm going to be doing a full video on this later on, probably this week. I think it's pretty important for somebody to cover this. God knows that no real journalists are actually covering this. They're kind of just looking into it. The Epoch Times has done a pretty good job of covering everything play by play, but I'd like to take a few moments to, I'd like to take a few hours to go into exactly what the hell happened here. Now, moving forward, there's more unrest in the country, this time in Wisconsin, and it is coming from the lack of charges being filed against a police officer who was involved in an officer-involved shooting of Alvin Cole, who was a 17-year-old in Wisconsin. Now, the reason I cover these unrest stories and the officer-involved shootings, it really doesn't have very much to do with Marxism, because it is kind of breaking news. But the reason that I look into it is because Black Lives Matter really does push a lot of fake narratives. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization on my radar. I follow a lot of their stuff because more often than not, they put out false claims and over-exaggerated claims of police brutality and whatnot. So I find it very interesting to look into what's going on here. So here's the story. No charges against Wauwatosa Officer Joseph Mensah for shooting of Alvin Cole. I have no idea how to say the name of that city. I think it's Wauwatosa. Could be wrong, but forgive me. I'm not from Wisconsin. Okay, so Wisconsin's local radio station says, and I quote, "The Milwaukee County District's Attorney Office will not file charges against Wauwatosa police officer Joseph Mensah for the shooting death of Alvin Cole." Quote, "In this case, there is sufficient evidence that Officer Mensah had actual subjective belief that deadly force was necessary," says Chris Holm in a 14-page report released Wednesday afternoon, and that belief was objectively reasonable. "I do not believe the state could disprove self-defense or defense of others in this case, and therefore could not meet the burden required to charge Officer Mensah." Cole was shot by Mensah outside the Mayfair Mall February 2nd, 2020, during a police response for a man with a gun at the mall. Okay, so there's that story. It's breaking today. Obviously, here is a video from TMJ4. I guess we can play it. Let's listen to what these guys have to say. I think this is the family of Alvin Cole.
Alvin Cole! Say it louder! Alvin Cole! We love you. First of all, I want to thank y'all
for showing us support during this grieving time. At this time, Chisholm did not justify my son's murder by Joseph Mensah. Once again, he could not he said he could not really justify it.
Turn that camera off!
It's fine. What camera? There's like a million cameras.
So basically, that's what's going on right now. He couldn't make a decision about or anything, so that's all I have to say.
I guess I'll talk. Just like what my mom said, D.A. Chisholm did not justify this shooting, which means Alvin did not shoot at Joseph Mensah. Joseph Mensah is not a credible source in this case right now. Joseph Mensah and Jay Anderson case and Antonio Gonzalez case has lied several times. And from the investigators who released their reports today, they not only said that Joseph should be fired immediately, but he is not credible. He was not credible in Jay Anderson's case. So he would not be credible in Alvin Cole's case.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it right there because I think that there's some things to be said about what we just heard. So there was a statement made by Alvin Cole's mother and his sister. And I just want to be very clear that it is always really heartbreaking seeing somebody lose their family member. Whether or not it's an officer-involved shooting, whether or not it's a justified officer-involved shooting, it is really, really sad to see people lose their family. Period. End of story, regardless of what happened. It would be best, obviously, if people were able to de-escalate situations better and officers were trained to bring situations back under control without having to use deadly force. Period. Okay? I think that there is a lot of room for improvement in this country about how officers handle dangerous situations. I don't think that officers should necessarily be de-armed, but I do think that there needs to be a lot of training regarding how to de-escalate situations and how to control a situation without deadly force being one of the first go-tos, right? Okay. Now, she brought up a couple of things there, and I just want to say that my heart goes out to his mom and his sister because you can tell that his mom is in a lot of pain, and I have personally seen some people lose their child, lose their only child, and it is like, it is worse seeing somebody go through that pain than actually losing the person yourself. Like, if you have a friend who you've lost, it is extremely hard to lose a friend. It is harder, in my opinion, to watch their family go through that. Period. It is really, really sad. It's a really sad thing to watch a family go through losing somebody they love. So, my heart goes out to his family. I'd like to go into what they were saying about an investigator. First and foremost, I hate to bring up race, but because race has become such a huge topic in police discussions and officer-involved shootings, it is worth pointing out that Officer Mensah is a Black American and Alvin Cole was also a Black American. Now, Officer Mensah apparently had been involved in other shootings in the past, and the past 5 years there had been 3 deaths that resulted in an officer-involved shooting in which he was the officer. Now, an independent investigator was involved in looking into this case. There was no body cam footage because the officers in this area are not required to have body cams on. I think that it would be a very wise step in the right direction for every police officer in the entire country to have a body cam on at all times. Period. Body cams on every officer is like a must. Because what that does is not only does it protect citizens from police brutality, unnecessary use of force, it also protects police departments from, one, employing officers who are doing the wrong thing in certain situations, and also it would protect departments from like false accusations of unnecessary use of force. So it is a good tool for both everyday citizens and police departments to kind of bridge that gap of trust with each other. If we have body cam footage for every interaction that a police officer goes through on a day-to-day basis, that is a huge plus for everybody, I think. And so it is, in my opinion, a real shame that there was no body cam footage from this event. Now, an independent investigator did look into this, and they are recommending firing the officer involved. Like I said, primarily because he has shot and killed 3 people in the past 5 years. That's a lot of shootings for a single officer. Not only is that kind of a testament to whether or not they can de-escalate situations, but it is also concerning because I think that after killing somebody on the job, you have probably a lot of psychological hurdles to go over, and to be put back on the job, I just don't know how that would impact. Like, I feel like you would have some sort of PTSD, and as a result, it might make you more willing to pull the trigger in the future. If the first time that you were in an officer-involved shooting, it was justified, let's just say, I'm not saying that any of them were, I'm just saying, for example, if you're an officer, you're involved in an officer-involved shooting, and it was justified because, let's say, the person's shooting at you, you shoot back and you kill them. Okay, now let's say, fast forward to the next time you are interacting with somebody who has a firearm, for example, a legally obtained, legally owned firearm. And perhaps they are just taking it off their holster to put it on the seat next to you. I'm not saying these are all just hypothetical situations, but you might be triggered by just seeing a firearm and being in that situation where somebody has a firearm in general, and you might feel threatened because you have PTSD. Like, this is a very serious job. It takes a toll emotionally and physically on these officers, and it is worth considering the fact that, if you've killed 3 people in the past 5 years, you probably are suffering from some pretty serious, mental and emotional struggles as a result of that. So let's read this article here. This is also by 620 WTMJ, Wisconsin's radio station, and it says here, let's read, quote, Madison, Wisconsin. An independent investigator is recommending officials in a Milwaukee suburb fire a police officer who has shot and killed 3 people in the last 5 years. Wowwasoda police officer Joseph Mensah shot and killed 17-year-old Alvin Cole in February. Cole was black, as is Mensah. 2 earlier shootings involving Mensah were ruled justified. Former U.S. Attorney Stephen Bispook looked into the most recent shooting at the request of Wowwasoda Police and Fire Commission. His report Wednesday concluded Mensah should be fired because of the risk of a 4th shooting is too great. The report comes as Milwaukee County prosecutor is expected to announce whether Mensah will be charged in Cole's death. Okay, so there you have it. End quote. An independent investigator is suggesting that he be fired, not because necessarily the shooting wasn't justified, but because, again, there is a risk of a 4th shooting, and I would venture a guess that this is largely caused by their concern of the emotional and psychological toll that 3 shootings in 5 years would have on somebody. It doesn't sound like they're laying any blame on him or saying that he was not justified in the shooting. They actually even said that the past 2 shootings he was involved in were ruled justified. However, at the end of the day, this is why soldiers come home with PTSD. They are involved in things that they're involved in, like taking a life, and that is very emotionally and psychologically just hard on a person. And so it sounds like they're concerned that he might have some sort of negative adverse reaction to what has happened. So that said, I'm going to go to one more story on this. I just wanted to do some due diligence on covering this because I think it's important to cover these stories and to really explain what is going on. So today, Wisconsin National Guard was deployed to the area before the lack of charges were announced regarding Officer Mensah. So the headline here is from JS Online. It says here, 15 seconds, 5 shots. Here's a timeline of how fatal shooting in February set off a summer of protests and unrest in Wowwasoda. This article here is just kind of covering what happened, what we know happened during that interaction between Cole and Officer Mensa. And so here I'm just going to read to give you guys an idea of what happened. Quote, a period of 15 seconds 6 months ago have led to a summer of protest, calls for change and justice in Wauwatosa. 15 seconds after a police officer yelled, drop the gun, 5 shots were fired, and Alvin Cole, a 17-year-old from Milwaukee, died in the parking lot of the Cheesecake Factory in Wauwatosa. Police say Cole fired a gun during the incident, something the family disputes. The officer involved was Joseph Mensa. It was his third fatal shooting in the last 5 years. He also killed Antonio Gonzalez in 2015 and Jay Anderson Jr. in 2016, 2 shootings that have been ruled justified self-defense. Mensa is black, Anderson and Cole were also black, Gonzalez was Latino. End quote. So I want to just point out that I was reading a separate article. I don't have it pulled up here, but I was reading a separate article that said basically that Alvin Cole did discharge his weapon. However, he accidentally shot himself in the arm. It doesn't sound like the young man was firing necessarily at officers. However, he did discharge his weapon, which is probably why the investigator said that it wouldn't be possible to prove that Mensa was unjustified because the individual's weapon, Cole's weapon, was discharged, and so it could be considered reasonable that he thought he was acting in self-defense. Now, the family says that he didn't fire his weapon. Obviously, the family wasn't there, and they want the best for their loved one. Either way, it sounds like 3 shootings in 5 years, and it looks like 2 of them were back to back to one another. So it sounds like, probably just not safe to have this officer on the street because of the psychological toll that can come from being involved in an officer-involved shooting. Now, regardless of the facts of the case, as always, Black Lives Matter protesters, rioters, direct actioners have taken to the streets of the area, and earlier today, it sounds like there was a big group marching through the streets. They shut down the interstate. I have a video here. Officers were making arrests of people who were blocking the highway. However, there's only so many officers and there's a huge group of people. So the Wisconsin National Guard has been deployed to the area. We'll see whether or not anything goes down tonight, but there were a number of buildings being boarded up both in this immediate area where the charges were basically announced, they announced there would be no charges, and also at the border of Wisconsin. So all the way from this area to the border of Wisconsin, people are boarding up their businesses, which is very similar to what happened after the Breonna Taylor lack of charges were announced. So I think I'll play this video and then I'll leave you guys for the day. But here we go. This is what was happening in Wisconsin earlier. There's a number of people who are on the street. They're heading onto the interstate. The police have the interstate blocked off, the entrance, but they obviously can't stop the mob. That video there was from Elliot Hughes, at Elliot Hughes 12 on Twitter. He is from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. We'll see what happens tonight. We'll see if there's rioting. We'll see if there's destruction. Hopefully not. It kind of has been a hit and miss with these Black Lives Matter associated protesters. Sometimes it's just kind of chaos in the streets, and sometimes it's, Kenosha and destruction like what we've seen in Seattle, Portland, and other areas of the country. So hopefully things remain peaceful and they civilly and peacefully protest, which I personally have no issue with. I think that it's fine for Black Lives Matter protesters to be on the street peacefully protesting and not destroying property, but we will see if that happens. It hasn't always. Anyway, as always, you guys, thanks for watching. Again, my name's Angela Ramirez. You guys can find my investigative journalism at thenomanzone.com. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. We do a show every day, and hopefully you guys watch. I will be on the Conservative Chicanos YouTube channel tonight in about like 30 minutes. So if you guys want to watch me live in action with the Conservative Bear and Pablo, we'll be there. Last time we had the pleasure of having some guests on. It was very fun. We all have some different like backgrounds and political ideas, so it was fun kind of going back and forth with everybody. So anyway, if you guys enjoyed the video, like, subscribe. You guys can donate to my journalism on my site, thenomanzone.com. I would definitely appreciate it because I would really like to start doing this full time, but you know, you gotta pay bills. So if you guys want to help me make a jump to a full-time career in journalism, please consider donating. That'd be awesome. If you guys can't donate, I feel ya. Please just share the video. I really appreciate that, honestly, just as much as getting a donation. Thank you all for watching. Have a good one, guys. Bye, everybody.